Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what is the last of our weekly series of webinars. This time all about dealing with the effects of damp, principles and considerations. Now, this is, as I mentioned, the last of our weekly webinars, unfortunately, before we actually switch back to our monthly format of webinars. Just to let you know who I am, I'm Andy Ferguson from the Property Care Association, and joining me, or who I always know he's back, and joining me this morning, I'm pleased to say, is PC's CEO, Steve Hodgson. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, early joiners. How are you all?
Well, folks, we're waiting just for people to kind of join us this morning, I'm just going to just point you out to just a few things. Firstly, if you are one of our regular listeners, a big thanks for you for joining us again, and a big thanks as well for joining us on this, what is effectively a 3.5 month weekly CPD journey. If you are a new listener, then a big welcome to you as well. Over the course of the webinar, if you guys have any questions that you want to pose to us, let me just point you out over to our chat facility. Now, if you're on a desktop computer, that chat facility, depending on your settings, will either just be on the left or the right hand side. All you simply need to do is there is a comments functionality on it, or box. Just go there, just type in whatever the question is that you want to ask, hit send, and we'll be able to pick it up. But also, if you're there as well, if you just want to say a good morning, a hello, tell us where you are in the world, feel free just to type it in there as well. If you are on a mobile device, similar functionality, all you simply need to do is just scroll up a little bit. You will see that comments functionality as well. There is other ways in which you can post questions over the course of the webinar to us. Firstly, via email. You can email me directly and I'll pose it to Steve at the end. My email address is just andy@property-care.org. That's andy@property-care.org. Or alternatively, if you are so socially savvy, we're always up for the chat and saying hello via social media. You can find us on all the main social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Simply just go to the native search functionality, type in Property Care Association, and we should pop up. While we're waiting to start, I just want to make a mention about if you do experience any problems over the course of the webinar. We are aware that at 9 o'clock, everyone's turning on their computers for work. Joe Wicks in the morning, or I think he was in the morning anyway, a wee bit unsure, stimulating the nation. If you do have any problems, then there will be a reconnection button that will pop up on your screen. And for anyone on the messenger, if you are seeing anything of anyone having some issues, just mention that to them. There's a reconnection button that pops up. Just simply click on that and you should be okay for joining us again. Now, guys, we've still got a couple of minutes just before we kind of start. I alluded to just right at the very start, just an important announcement to you all. You heard me mention it about our weekly webinars, and this has been the last of our weekly webinars. We are, as of next month, switching to our monthly format of webinars, which will be running from the 23rd of July. I do have a question, however, for everyone, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me out just while we're waiting. We have been sort of going back and forth in terms of the time of which we should be doing this webinar at. Now, traditionally, when we started this, we were looking at this almost like a breakfast bite and starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish for 9 before everyone starts work. However, I'm going to throw out a poll just to everyone here that's on a call, because I'm interested in finding out from yourself. I mean, does this 8 o'clock format work better for you? Should we keep it at 9 o'clock, or is there a balance between maybe 8:30 or a wee bit later? I've just pushed that poll out just to everyone the now. While I'm waiting for people to come back and just with your answers. Steve, I have to say, I mean, this weekly format, I mean, when everyone kicked off and about lockdown, I mean, this was your brainchild, I suppose. I mean, you've seen this through for the last 3.5 months. I mean, I have to say, I mean, certainly from my point of view, it's been quite a journey, but I know you've been working hard behind the scenes yourself, good sir.
Well, you know, it gave us something to do for a few months, didn't it? Nothing else. We don't want to sit around kicking our heels waiting for the phone to ring. That's not what we were about. So, you know, I think that as we've discussed amongst ourselves in the office and with board members and other members, I think that the association's aim was to keep people engaged, was to keep the communications up, to keep the information flow going, and hopefully come out of the lockdown phase of coronavirus in a position where we'd enhanced our reputation rather than shrunken back into the undergrowth. And I think hopefully we've achieved that. And no, I'm not doing pro webinars at 7 o'clock in the morning, John. It's not happening.
No chance, John. I'm not getting up at that time either. But here, guys, it's literally is at that time where we are about to start. I can see there's a clear winner on the polls. Big thanks to everyone there. That clear winner was keep it at 9 a.m. A big thanks to all for kind of doing that. Just before we start, just for all those that have just joined us, if you do have any questions over the course of the webinar, I would encourage you just to go to the chat functionality on desktops. It's just to the left or the right of you. Just use the comments bit, send us your question. On mobile, just scroll up. Or alternatively, you can email it at me at andy@property-care.org. Well, everyone, I have to say it's 9 o'clock at the moment, bang on. I suppose, Steve, unlike some of your other damp-related talks, I know this one is a little bit different. So I suppose, what are the principles and considerations that a damp contractor must possess to deliver appropriate remedial strategies? Over to yourself, good sir.
Well, before I get into the presentation, I kind of just address something that's been brought up with me a couple of times. These presentations aren't. I've had a couple of emails from members saying, "Well, Steve, there's nothing really new. When you're not teaching as much, this is stuff we knew. Well, let's move on to more groundbreaking topics." And my response has been consistent all the way through. This is not for us. These presentations are to demonstrate largely what we know already and the way and illustrate the way that we operate in the market and relate to our customers now. The problem that we've got is actually communicating our values out to our potential clients. And that's what these presentations are about. And in some respects, today is not going to be massively insightful for members, but hopefully what it will do is it will provide a reference point that actually we can point to that shows what the association is about, the way we think our way through problems and the way that we deliver solutions. So I know the next couple of slides are a little bit repetitive, but what we have to establish before we move into repair strategies is that the diagnostics are done. We dealt with that last time, and you know, and anybody that's interested can go and look at that. There's a link in a second. But today we're going to look at the considerations, the strategy that's adopted, specifications, and execution. And I started off trying to build these slides in a way that was, you know, very predictive and very unitary, but it all kind of got a bit confused, like it does, a lot like my kind of rough and informal way of delivering presentations. I'm never quite sure where I'm going to end up once I've started, but usually it kind of works out somewhere like. So what are considerations? The considerations, and I'm going to read some bits off the slides, which I generally don't do, but the list of things that a specifier of repair work needs to take into account. These are the whole kind of the holistic thoughts about the ethical, the budgetary, the construction matters, the placing of the building, the exposure of the building, those sorts of things. There are some really, you know, very important considerations to take on board. Then we'll look at the strategy and how a specification is brought up and delivered. Then we'll think about execution. And then lastly, we're going to talk about guarantees a little bit. And the guarantee stuff is there as much as anything else to give me an opportunity to have a grumble and to kind of express some of the frustrations that I've felt with some of the criticism that we've had recently. So again, on the remediation stuff, we did that presentation a month or so ago. That's still available. You can link to that through the highlighted link at the bottom. But the point here is that why do we bother? Why do we need to think about damp repair, control, remediation? Well, as we said in the last presentation, water in buildings has a consequence, or often has a consequence. Occasionally it doesn't, but mostly lots of free water that can move about, that can get into materials, that can decompose, help begin the process of decomposition. The water has a consequence. So we understand that this water comes from either the ground, the sky, or occupation. And I think it can be broken down. I know it's more complicated than that, but I think it can be broken down really into those very, very limited numbers of sources. And obviously the water in the ground came from the sky at some point. But that's slightly more complicated. Let's deal with groundwater as water that's locked, trapped, or is domiciled in the ground, and water from the sky is rainwater. Occupation, obviously, is the water that's generated inside the building by the people that live in it. The one thing that we know as practitioners and specialists in dampness is that often there is more than one contributory factor. We're lucky if we find a damp problem where we can be absolutely 100% sure that there is one source of water and only therefore one solution. Often, even if it turns out that there is only one source of water, there are a number of avenues of investigation that have to be followed in order that we can absolutely nail the source. Now, I have put a little note in green at the bottom, and flood release of water important, but that's really for another day. That is, a fourth source of water, if you like. So today we're going to look at water from the ground, rainwater penetration, condensation. And we're also going to look about the treatment and protection of timber as well, very briefly. But let's get into the four elements. And again, this is another very quick slide just to reinforce the fact that before we do anything in regard to rectification and repair, we really need to understand what the source of free water is. It's impossible to specify a targeted rectification and remediation strategy unless you know what the target is, what the foe is, what the defect is. And so, yeah, I make no apologies for being a bit repetitive on that. So these are the considerations that run through our minds every time we stand on the doorstep of a building that has a defect. These are not extraordinary things. These are things that are there either in our conscious or our subconscious thoughts. So we consider the defect. Why is there a defect there? Why is the water there? Why is there a problem? And we think about whether the source is as a result of damage, or whether it's a design fault, whether it's age or maintenance related, whether the building's orientation is such that it's catching a lot of weather. Now, the photograph that I put on in the bottom right hand corner is not a picture of an old defect, but that's a picture of a piece of retrofit insulation with a piece of plastic stuck over the top of the EWI, made up to a soffit. We know that may not be a defect now, but actually, what are the implications of that? The thought processes there are not one-dimensional. That is a potential fault. We can think through that. We can think about what the implications of that might be, and that, in some respects, not only guides the rectification strategy, but it has probably already guided the diagnostic journey. The building, what is it and where? Now, lots of you have seen this photograph in the background now. You look at that and you think, well, it's a terrace house somewhere. What's so special about that? Getting under its skin, understanding the vernacular is really important. So that's a Bungaroosh building right by the railway station in Brighton. very, very complicated in regard to the water problems it's got. Parapet roofs, it's got all of that stuff going on, but the basic construction material underneath is garbage. Garbage with a render coat. Understanding the building and understanding what you can and can't do with that building, constructionally or structurally, is really important. The materials, we've kind of covered that already in that little conversation, but the materials also include what's behind the facade. So what's holding those window openings up? Are there timbers in there? Are there constructional or structural elements that may be at risk because of the water ingress? And again, we come on to historical, architectural, and cultural significance. A building may or may not be listed, and we've crossed over onto the next bullet point as well. But the fact is, even with a building that isn't listed, there may be elements inside that building that are special, that are worth keeping, that are important to the street scene, or actually the value of the building. We work with clients to ensure that those things are preserved, protected, and we sometimes draw those to our clients' attention. Now, the thing that often is massively overlooked, particularly by those that suggest that terrible contractors do terrible things for terrible prices, is the client's needs. The client is king. Without the client and their checkbook, nothing happens. Whether that's a landlord, a property owner, whether it's a developer, whoever it might be, unless you get buy-in from that person who holds the purse strings, you don't do anything. And so the client applies constraints. Time is often of the essence. How quickly the work gets done, how quickly they want to reoccupy, put a new tenant in, move in, when the carpets are coming, because they've already booked those and they've only got one window to do that. We've all had those pressures. Budget, what it looks like, the amount of disturbance that's going to be caused inside the property and for how long. And the other point that I picked up there is endurance. Clients want things to last. Going and telling something that, well, it'll probably be all right, but there's a moderate possibility of it going wrong and there being a stain, or it'll probably fall off the wall in 10 years, is often totally unacceptable to a client. And so solutions have to be found that will endure when that is a specification or a requirement from an owner. Well, the other thing that we often don't talk about and that we get tripped up as an industry on is the issue of maintenance. A great deal of construction defects, you find that the nub of the problem is poor maintenance. And we know that people are bad at maintaining buildings for many reasons. Either they just don't plan it, they don't schedule it, they don't see the importance of it, they can't afford it, they don't have the physical attributes, they don't want to engage in long-term relationships with contractors to maintain things. Lots and lots of reasons why maintenance doesn't happen. We need, and we do, understand that and take that into account when we're drawing up specifications for work. Now, we're talking about strategy. There is really only one rule. And that really, when you're dealing with dampness, is to eliminate water before it enters the building. There really isn't another way of doing things. Well, there is, but they're a compromise. So if you really want to get rid of water, then actually you're going to try and find the point of water entry and eliminate it at that point if you possibly can. Now, I'm going to do a little, and I know we've got probably lots of friends on this call and members of the association, but I just wanted to run a little poll before we run into anything else. It's something that dogs us from time to time, and I can tell you where the smart money is in a moment. But who out there, and Andy's going to step in a second, I think. Let's ask the question, does rising damp exist? Does rising damp exist? Are buildings affected by water from the ground where there isn't a barrier to stop it?
Well, folks, just to let you know, I've just shoved out a wee poll there. It should hopefully have popped up on your screen. If it's a mobile device, you may just need to scroll up just a little bit. It'll be where where you've been typing in comments within the chat. Steve, I can tell you the results are kind of coming through.
Well, of course they are, and everybody's saying yes, apart from one or two people that are being slightly scurrilous. or a plant. Of course, rising damp exists. Of course, it does. And the mere thought that it doesn't is a little bit like suggesting that the Earth is flat. We did rising damp experiments or capillarity experiments at school when we were 13. The same processes apply. If there's free water at the ground and you've got a porous structure, then water will come up through the pores, and there will be, in essence, a rise of water. Nobody, seriously, I can tell you, at either Historic England, Historic Scotland, SPAB, or anywhere else, actually, that are in positions of authority, that actually write the rules and know what they're talking about, don't believe in rising damp. There are, however, some evangelical people out there that will go to their graves screaming that any form of dampness that's coming up the walls is the result of something mysterious that isn't rising damp. Well, it's nonsense. Of course it does. But it doesn't mean that the only way to control and manage dampness that rises up the walls from the ground is by installing a chemical DPC. So let's open our minds to the fact that actually you can potentially reduce ground levels. Reducing ground levels is a way of taking the free water away from the base of a wall. You can improve drainage, and in fact you should improve drainage. You should ensure that the drainage that is there is working well and clear and can remove that free water from the base of the walls. But you can also improve drainage by doing more, by increasing the rate at which the water is removed from the areas at the bases of walls, and it will have a massively beneficial effect. You can remove obstructions and things that have bridged the existing damp control barriers. So clearing cavities of obstructions, removing plasters or renders that have bridged or compromised the DPC. All of those things are perfectly good control strategies. Introducing barriers is at the bottom towards the bottom of the list. But introducing barriers is a perfectly reasonable solution, provided that you have thought it through. Now, those barriers, in some circumstances, may be wholly inappropriate, where you have buildings that are highly protected or may be damaged by the installation process. But where you have situations where the best economic solution for controlling the dampness from the ground is the installation of a chemical damp-proof course, and it's going to work, and it's going to deliver a solution at a good price, reliable, and all of that with it, all of that stuff. Well, actually, why not? It works. It's tried and tested. If it's done properly, it's not going to scar the building badly. Why not? The other alternative is to live with the dampness. And dampness is really only a problem if you take the point of view that it's going to spoil your enjoyment of the building, or it's going to cause decay and deterioration of the fabrics. If it does neither, then actually leaving it alone is a perfectly reasonable solution. Though there are additional issues to consider, and often it's not the acceptable solution. So we've kind of talked about above ground. What about below ground? Now, I saw somebody the other day who was specifying a basement conversion or some basement works. Some very high-profile person with a very loud voice, who recommended in a semi-basement in London that was below ground on two sides, that applying hot lime to the walls would get rid of their water ingress problem. Well, I'm sorry, it won't. It will fall off the wall in a very short space of time. It has no resistance to hydrostatic head, and it will stain in no time at all. With issues below ground, you really do have to think out of the box. Now, there are lots of basements that aren't occupied spaces that can stay damp, and they shouldn't be meddled with. There's no point in spending lots of money and time doing things in a basement that's unoccupied that all you're going to keep in it is an old bike. But if you're going to live in it, you're going to have to do something. So reducing ground levels is impossible in pretty much every existing cellar. Improving drainage, always. If that's at all possible, you should do it. Remove obstructions, yes. Introduce new barriers, almost always. And living with it, yeah, as we say, not if it's occupied. I've got to be careful with time. I'm waffling and kind of going over all over the place. Salts. Salts are a byproduct of that moisture movement, often deposited in the masonry, deposited in the plasters, deposited in finishes. And salts can be, as I've said in this, a right pain in the bum. They do move about. They are mobile. They can change state. They go from crystalline to liquid. If they're left in situ, they can absorb moisture from the air. They stain finishes, and they do cause the underlying materials to degrade in some circumstances with some salts as they crystalline and pressures build up just under the surfaces. So how do we deal with salts? We can do all the things that we've talked before, but actually reducing ground levels, improving drainage, they're controlling the moisture. They're not controlling the salts. The salts are there. And so generally the way that salts are dealt with are one of two ways, but the most common is to introduce barriers to prevent those salts coming to the surface and causing a problem. However, it's more and more we're seeing companies and individuals talking about poulticing and removing salts. Be careful. It is possible, but it's a very, very slow process. And so there's a balance. When we're specifying, when we're looking at these solutions, there's a balance there between what's possible, what's economic, what gains and advantages you get. But the fact is that actually sometimes covering it up may well be your only answer. But again, it's horses for courses. We go back to one of the earlier slides and we have to think about the building, its significance, its historical value, the construction materials, and what happens when we apply these coatings. So how do we go about it? The specification. We stop and manage the water. We do that with barriers, potentially. We do that with other means. We can cover it up. We can redesign. We can improve the drainage. But before we move on from the control of the damp to something else, one thing that, again, because of the constraints placed on us as contractors, and partly because of the history of the expectation of our clients, we very rarely leave a period of drying. Now, drying, I think, is something that is often overlooked and that we should do more of. If we can possibly leave the building empty for a longer period of time, then actually reinstating the finishes are much better. And some of the solutions that we currently adopt, in order that we can build a buffering period and a safe buffering period through the drying phase, get the job done all in one hit, some of those pressures are removed. And we can use different materials for finishing them. But again, this is all about conversation and communication with the client and getting them, as well as everybody else in the chain of procurement, to understand that there are alternatives. And again, living with things can be an option. So we're going to speed up a little bit now, but water penetration. Water penetration, rainwater penetration, penetrating damp, whatever you want to call it, water that comes from the sky in and enters the building, is often and usually a failure, again, in the design, in the materials that the building is constructed with, or the systems. So the systems that drains the gutters, the roofs, parapets, and all that kind of stuff. Now, if you look at that little tiny picture in the top left-hand screen, now what is that? I can tell you there's rainwater damage on the inside of that building, quite considerable water penetration. That's a design issue, not necessarily a materials issue, because the brickwork is okay. There's not particularly high amounts of exposure, but it's also the systems are crap as well. You know, who would ever in their right mind design that as a rainwater management system and not expect it to stuff up? And it has spectacularly. So our options really are to improve design, change materials, repair and renew defective systems, and introduce new barriers. Don't like that really. Actually, that gets away from that ethos of securing the moisture, getting rid of the moisture at the source of entry. Or again, you can live with it. Living with rainwater penetration is difficult, and perhaps we'll come on to that in a second. No, we won't. We'll deal with it now. Why is it much more difficult to really live with rainwater penetration than it is to live with potentially rising damp? Well, rainwater penetration is driven by gravity. So it comes in at a small point at the top and it spreads out. and there's lots of pictures kicking about, and we all know that you have a small point of water ingress, and then we have water spread, and then it goes out in a lovely cone-shaped fan from the point of entry. Well, it emits all sorts of things and all sorts of good things that can decay and become affected by that. The other thing is that often what happens is once those moisture pathways are formed, then the rate of moisture ingress starts to increase. So you start with a little bit, and before you know it, 4 or 5 years later, you're getting a lot in. So my suggestion for everybody is living with rainwater ingress is not really that feasible, unless you really know what you're doing. So again, how do we deal with rainwater ingress? What's the specification? Well, first thing is understand the defect, of course, but we've already part of that. Stop the water ingress. Find out what has failed. Find out what element, whether it's materials, design, whatever it is, and rectify it. Now, that rectification can often take different forms. The fact is that it may well be a construction or a design issue, and there's no reason, sympathetically, within the constraints of planning regulations and everything, why and building control and listed buildings consent with the input from a conservation officer, why designs can't be changed, manipulated, altered, or improved to prevent water ingress. Sympathetically, yes. Taking a responsible attitude towards those construction or design changes, yes, but the benefits from those changes can be massive to the long-term prospects of the building. So stopping the water ingress, drying the underlying structures, and here in many respects there can be huge amounts of water inside the structure as a result of rainwater ingress. And trying to rectify and repair the walls with external or internal coatings, new plasters, new finishes, can be a real fool's errand unless you can try and get the structure below dry. And again, this is something that I don't think that we stress enough with our clients, the benefits of drying. And I think that's something that industry has always been afraid to say, because the next bloke through the door is going to say, no, love, we can sort this out in a fortnight. It's one of the things that the association is perhaps going to concentrate on more over the next few years, is that period where a building can dry. Difficult in mid-December, absolutely perfect conditions for drying in late June, as we can see today. Then you repair anything that's been damaged by the water, and we're talking about the structures, the timbers, the things that are friable, that have opened up those moisture pathways. Fix them. And repair them in a reasonable, sympathetic way. Don't overdo it, but fix them. Then reinstate the finishes with materials that are appropriate. And I say appropriate. What I'm not saying is replace everything in hot line. What I'm saying is understand the condition of the underlying materials and apply the finishes that are appropriate to conditions of the underlying materials. That's not just the density, the age, and the location. That has to do with the residual moisture content, with the traffic that those areas are going to get, with the maintenance capacity of the tenants and owners. So there's a whole bunch of things to take into account there. We also have to think about preventing future water ingress, and that comes in part back to the design, but also may come down to recommending or trying to sign an owner up to a maintenance program. Maintenance and the general care of the building will be the key to preventing future water ingress and spotting defects early if they occur. So let's talk about moisture imbalance and condensation. And I call it atmospheric moisture index imbalance condensation in brackets for a reason. Mold grows without condensation. Condensation is just the liquid that is derived from the gas. But the fact is that, we all know, and we should all know, that mold growth and the symptoms of imbalance can happen well before we have a problem with condensation. So imbalance. We have imbalance because either the production of moisture is too high, the ability for a building to lose that water is insufficient, the energy input isn't enough, so there's not enough heat going into the building in the right way bring the moisture contents to a control, or the thermal performance of the envelope is insufficient. And so what you get is you might well get warm air in the middle of the room, but by the time you get close to looking at the water activity at the surface of the wall, you've got an imbalance, you've got a problem. So I hear a lot at the moment, and I'm getting quite a lot of stick out there in the world for suggesting that that trying to set a value on air moisture content is not necessarily the way to go. So one high-profile gobby sod keeps telling the world that if you can get the building to 15 degrees with 7 grams of moisture per meter squared, then the building will be dry. Not just the air, but the whole building will be dry. You'll never get rising damp. You'll never get problems with dampness. You'll never get condensation. Well, you know, actually, that's absolutely right. But try and achieve those figures. Actually look at real buildings and try and achieve those buildings in the winter in occupied spaces. It's almost impossible. It may be possible at certain points, and it's not impossible in my house. But I live in a reasonably airy building with a partner who opens the windows at all times and then turns the heatings on as well, which annoys the tits off me. But you know, there we are. The fact is, however, that when we're looking and trying to diagnose problems and trying to come up with solutions for condensation, for atmospheric mold problems with mold, we need to be thinking about all these 4 things: moisture production, ventilation, energy, and thermal performance, and trying to strike a balance. Moisture content can be high if we can get rid of that moisture content. The fact is that we can carry more vapor pressure differential if we're not losing anything to we're not getting problems with high levels of moisture activity at the surface of the wall, because the envelope is good. So it's a balance. It's not a linear thing. It's an atmospheric moisture control. So managing atmospheric has to be done in partnership with the owners of the building, with the occupants of the building. It's very difficult to impose regimes to manage condensation problems if you don't get buy-in. The owners and the occupiers have to understand that they are largely responsible for the production of the water, and they are largely responsible for the operation of the equipment that's going to be installed. And actually working with owners is incredibly beneficial. Now, atmospheric moisture management is not all dead simple. It is and can be quite a complicated thing. And what I would say, however, and the thing that I've put this in again, this is a little bit of a soapbox slide, is that the mold itself is a simple symptom of an imbalance. Mold is not the problem itself. It's the canary in the cage. It's the thing that points to that problem. It doesn't tell you why the imbalance exists, but it tells you that at that point, for protected periods of time, there is an imbalance. There's high levels of moisture. There's conditions right for mold growth. But that's pointing towards different things. So for me, there is a whole lot of silliness talked about mold remediation. The focus shouldn't be on mold remediation. It should be on moisture remediation. It should be on bringing the property into balance. Once the built property is in balance, the mold will stop growing. You can paint over it and do what you like with it. And I'm not going to get today into the debate about how toxic mold is or what it does to you. It's an unpleasant thing. You don't want it in your house. I don't want it in my house. But the fact is we've lived with mold for a very, very long time. We don't want to live with it forever. We can get rid of it. So, and this is just a little bit of a prompt for our own work. Wouldn't it be nice to have an instrument that calculates and evaluates atmospheric moisture imbalance and then guarantees, then generates a report autonomously for you to tell you where the imbalances are and point you towards rectification solutions? Yes, it would. And yes, we've got one. And we are working currently with UCL on how we generate those autonomous reports. We've done all the proof of concept. It's on its way. We hope that we will soon find a backer and that we'll be able to buy this from the shelves and use it to benefit clients in the next couple of years. So we'll talk about a little bit now about timber protection principles, and we will rattle through this a little bit. wood and bugs. So as far as wood is concerned, defects with rot, always, and there is no other way around it, is to establish the source of water that could enable the rot. There is always a source of water, and it doesn't matter how difficult it might be to find, you've always got to find it. The investigations have to be done in order to prevent any future infestation, any future outget of rot. So primarily, we need to understand where the water's come from. The other thing that's important to do is investigate the full extent of the outbreak. Water is a peculiar foe. It does all sorts of things. You may well have thought you found it, but unless you go right to the end of the timber, or you investigate fully to wherever it's, turns out to be dry, you can't be sure you've got it all. So understanding and profiling the building, understanding where the water has gone, what it might have affected is absolutely key. When you have done all that, then you need to think about evaluate the structural and constructional implications of the decay. That doesn't just mean, is the wood rotten and does it need to be replaced? It's also about what are the implications it's had on the masonry. Has the masonry shifted? Taking things out and putting things back, is that going to cause cracks? Is that going to cause further problems? So understanding all of that stuff is really important. Eliminate the water source in a way that will prevent any further ingress. And this is back to thinking about these things in a holistic way, not just in a linear way. There is a defect, let's patch it up. So, for example, I've seen some massive problems with decay where you've got hidden valleys or parapets. You might just decide you're going to fix the parapet in a like-for-like repair. But actually, there's a huge opportunity there sometimes to redesign those parapets or those valley gutters to ensure that they're much more robust in the way that they're put together, and that limits the possibilities or reduces the possibilities of future defect. Promote drying before reinstatement. The fact is that we are moving, and we have moved away. We have moved massively away from the use of masonry sterilants. So masonry sterilants only ever really gave us a buffer for drying. It meant that we could reinstate very quickly, safe in the knowledge that there was a relatively unfriendly environment for any new fungus to grow. Now, if we're not doing that with masonry sterilants, not adding all that extra water in, not putting those materials as biocides into the wall, then actually that buffer, that protection we've got through the drying period is diminished. So drying again is something that I think that we're going to have to do a lot more of in the future, and we're going to have to promote a lot more to clients before reinstatements take place. Repair, replace, preserve, and protect timber. There is absolutely a place for preservatives, but as we have developed and as our knowledge has grown, and as the limits to the access to the range of products has grown, those treatments have become more and more targeted. And right now we are using materials that are not as effective potentially as they were 25 years ago. But we know more about them, and we know how to use them, and we know how to use them effectively. Doesn't do much for chemical sales, but what it does do is it means that we're much more diligent with our repair strategies. So bugs, again, pretty much the same. Establish the insect affecting the wood, so know your foe. The one thing that we often try and do, and should always do, is try and understand the viability of the infestation. Is it active? Are there fresh bugs coming out of holes and all that kind of stuff? Sometimes, again, it's not easy to do if what you've got is a building that's in the middle of a terraced house somewhere that's in the middle of a sale. You've got one chance to go and look at it. You've got to make an evaluation of the infestation, and then make recommendations based on that. No one's going to thank you for saying it's going to take you 2 years to find out whether the woodworm's active if somebody's trying to negotiate on the price based on the findings of your report. So we have to make assumptions. Having said that, there are ways and techniques that can be adopted or that are adopted to find out whether you've got active infestations. One of the best giveaways, of course, is to go and find lots of dead bugs on a windowsill. But I got caught out with that, and I'm sure other people have got caught out with that before, finding lots of dead bugs and then finding it got nothing to do with the structural timbers in the house. but somebody's bought some decorative timber in to use and stock up next to a log burner that they never use, and it's full of bugs. Understand the extent of the infestation, of course, and evaluate the structural implications of those infestations. So what boards have been weakened, what joints need to be repaired. And then it's control. And desiccation and heat are both valid forms of control. Desiccation essentially is a long-term process of getting the timber too dry to support the infestations. It's very, very difficult to do in occupied buildings because the timber is hygroscopic. It will absorb atmospheric moisture. The moisture contents go up and down. Bugs are generally very good at dealing with periods of drought and take advantage of periods where there's more water around. So I've heard of quite a few people sort of recommending that desiccation is a good control method. It's very difficult. Heat, I've seen commercial heat treatments being done for anobids and death watch. Again, they work. What you need to do is get the heat up to 52 degrees at the point where the bug is, and generally you'll denature after a few hours and you'll kill them. 52, 54. The trouble with the experiment I saw was that actually the bits of wet timber that were embedded in the walls that had death watch in them were really, really, really difficult to get hot enough. And actually, there are some of the timbers that were dry and exposed, no problem at all. But actually the bits you're really trying to get hot were much more difficult. So the chemical biocides really that we're limited to treat infestations of bugs with now are boron and permethrin. Both reliable, both well understood, both very safe. So what I would end up with the wood thing is I love wood. Wood is a wonderful thing. Look after it and it will last pretty much forever. So I did say I was going to talk very quickly about guarantees, and I've got about 5 or 10 minutes to vent my spleen and have a grumble. Why do companies issue guarantees? Do companies issue guarantees because they want to, because they think it's a commercially astute thing to do that adds value to their book and then their company's worth? Well, no, they don't. They issue guarantees because they've developed strategies to meet the requirements of the market, and because they can. And where's the demand come from for the guarantees? It comes from lenders, it comes from homeowners, and it comes from various other people. Now I'm going to do the second bit of the poll. I hope Andy hasn't fallen asleep. It's a very lonely and quiet place when you're talking to yourself like this. It's all a bit odd.
Sorry, I'm here. And
so who thinks, and I will change the slide, should contractors issue guarantees? What do you think? Should we be issuing guarantees for preservative work, for preservation work? Are they a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be issuing them? I'll give you a couple of seconds on that.
Well, I can't tell you. The answers are coming through quite thick and fast at the moment, Steve. There's I know you can't quite see the results. There's an interesting kind of blend. I don't want to say it over the chat.
Let's say it. Just tell me. I can't see the results, but I want to know.
Well, certainly at the moment in time, and it's kind of chopping and changing. Almost 50% are saying yes. About 42% are saying depends, with a very small number saying no at the moment. So, folks, I'm just going to leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds or so. So, if you want to do it,
well, okay, you can do that. But that kind of reflective. Now, my own view is, and I've given this far too much thought. Why shouldn't we issue guarantees? If a client demands a guarantee, why shouldn't we issue them? We should issue them only when we're comfortable to do so, and when we think the specification and the course of action is right to do so. But actually, why shouldn't we, if the demand is there for a guarantee, do that? There are a number of other conflicts around the whole issue of guarantees. When a client demands inexpensive, do we say, this is not another poll, do we say no? Well, I don't think that we should. I think that we can find strategies and we can find ways to deal with properties that allow people with limited funds to live in a dry house. If a client says they need a job done quickly, we can talk to them about the pros and cons of doing a job quickly, but we shouldn't be turning those people away just summarily because they want quick. If we believe it's unethical, it's impossible, it's going to damage the building, then we can say no. But the fact is that if somebody wants to have something done and time is of the essence, then we have strategies for doing that. But we need to explain to our clients the pros and cons of that. If a client expects a guarantee of dryness, so they say, I want to know that my bugs are dead. I want to know that I'm not going to have to think about the dampness in my building for another 10 or 15 years. Why shouldn't we do that if we know we can deliver strategies that accomplish that? There isn't anything wrong with meeting a client's needs. And my question is, that keeps coming back and over again, is when I'm faced with the arguments around, the building is the king, and actually we're there to serve the building. We are in part, but actually a great amount of the time, we're there to serve the client, and we can only ever do what the client will accept, what the client wants. And if we're providing solutions that are unacceptable to the client, they will simply go somewhere else. So the argument here, and the thing that I kind of struggle with, is that the driving change in our sector and in the preservation industry is a much about educating the system of procurement and educating clients, and far less about educating my members and bringing members of the PCA to book, because actually we hold the key to delivering the best possible service. We're a facilitator of a solution. We're not the problem. And this is why joint working initiatives and links with other people are so important, so we can make this case rather than just taking a thumping all the time. So to conclude, and there are a couple of more slides, but the principles of moisture management till protection are very simple. It's about eliminating water, protecting structures, protecting vulnerable elements, and then reinstating in a way that delivers the right performance. The degradation of buildings is usually the result of moisture ingress. We know that. Detailed knowledge of construction is priceless. Absolutely it is, because that allows you to make the decisions that you do. And as I say, I've said this lots of times, the best surveyors are tenacious, interested in what they're doing, and are prepared to get under the skin of a problem. And they're also often the people that will discuss in detail with their clients what their needs are and what their expectations are. Recovery of dampness should be a staged process. And the big stage that I believe is something that we're going to have to move to more and more is that drying stage, is what we do about actually reducing the moisture content of the building before we start reapplying materials. So we understand that the water ingress has been concluded before we finish up. That's going to be very difficult to sell to people who are looking to get the decorators in, put the carpets in, have the kitchen fitted. In fact, it's almost an impossible conflict. But the fact is that better jobs are done if we can allow the building to dry before we reinstate. There's more than one possible fix. And so even though I absolutely curl my toes when I see specifications from so-called heritage surveyors that say, well, what you need to do is create a massive trench around the building, line it with flagstones and fill it with gravel, and then create a false reduced ground level that I, from my own experience, know is going to fill it with leaves and muck and not be maintained, and probably actually return the building after a great expense to a condition that it was worse than when we started. The fact is that, I mean, I am soapboxing now, I'm afraid. It is a case of making sure that actually the fix is right for the building, right for the client. Maintenance elements of that are fully understood and bought into. Penetrations, prevention. Prevention and maintenance is always the best solution. Deal with problems before they occur, and actually lots of this nonsense goes away. But the fact is that we know that lots of buildings are not maintained, and so that's a given. But and I don't believe that guarantees should be outlawed. But what I don't believe also is that everything is guaranteeable. And there is a huge spectrum of possibilities and a huge spectrum of what we should and shouldn't be doing. But actually, that's about negotiation with clients, helping clients understand what they can and can't do, and delivering the solutions that are right for the particular situation, and everybody being comfortable in that situation with guarantees. Now, I did see that somebody pinged up something about IBGs. IBGs are a different subject, but IBGs exist. Insurance-backed guarantees exist. They are available, and they have some value. One would argue now, with the economic circumstances as they are, perhaps more value than they've ever had. So, a final thought. Living in a dry, pest-free house is surely a right, not a privilege. And one of the things that really does kind of goad me a little bit is the fact that there is a thought that the property is always king. Sometimes the property is. If you've got buildings that are of very high cultural significance, architectural value, that are listed, that are protected, then actually the building does become king. But in a huge number, vast majority of situations, the client is king. And absolutely, surely it's right to be able to provide a solution that provides them with a dry environment that's safe, reliable, and affordable, rather than saying, you can't afford it, you're going to have to buy a solution that we know is a compromise and may fail. I think that everybody should be able to buy into that. And I also think that the next statement, I know it's going to annoy people, but I don't believe that just because you live in an old house, you should be made to live in conditions like our ancestors did. That's an unsustainable thought, and people will simply rebel and ignore it. I do, however, think there has to be a lot of buy-in to ensuring that what we do is sympathetic and right, but we should not be living in the Middle Ages if we happen to live in a house that was constructed in the Middle Ages. That's not a sustainable situation. Now, I've taken a bit of stick recently on social media, particularly on Twitter. Some of it a bit libelous, some of it a bit personal. The link at the bottom of the page is to a short and kind of grown-up response to some of that. So perhaps some of you could take a few minutes through the day or over the next couple of days to read it, to understand it, and sort of understand some of my thoughts around the subject of the I think unfortunate stick that I and the PCA have been getting from certain quarters. Mostly, I feel, to suit the commercial needs of those that are making the allegations rather than based on fact. But you can have a look at that if you want. So thank you for listening. I hope you didn't turn too many people off. I hope it didn't become too much of a soapbox rant at the end. But happy to take any questions that people have for the next few minutes. Thank you.
Oh, hello, folks. Sorry there. I was just very quickly just rattling up a wee post there. Just so if anyone's interested, you can click on the link and actually see that article for yourself. Well,
can I actually, Robin? Hello, Robin. It's very good to see you on this morning. I think that we did have lots of periods where buildings did, we were better or worse at dealing with buildings. But the fact is that we are pretty good these days at understanding how we live and the science of what we do and all the rest of it. And we could always look back and sort of say that, well, we knew better then. Perhaps we're not very good generally at dealing with defects in older buildings, but actually our understanding and the understanding of the science is better than it's ever been. And we can't, I don't think we can deny that. And I'm not sure personally what the basis of the thought is that we were better at looking after our buildings in the good old days. I'm not sure that that's the case, because cob walls have always fallen down. Thatches have always been poorly maintained. Things always went wrong, and we don't know how bad it was because we only see the buildings that have been well looked after. The ones that fell down aren't there anymore. We can't criticize the people that lived in them. So I think it's a very, very subjective conversation when we say that it was better in the good old days. We don't know. We weren't there. Sorry, Robin. When this is all over, let me buy you a cup of tea. I'd love to see you.
There you go, Robert. I'll hold him to that. I'll make sure he blows the dust off his wallet as well. Well, anyway, folks. Well, firstly, actually, Steve, just before I go on, as always, interesting thought provoking. You never kind of fail there. I will say this: so Robert Horn wasn't impressed with your image on your considerations slide, saying that that'll be leaking within 5 years or so. But I did actually feel that what you were actually talking about and stressing about the benefits of drying was actually particularly useful. And I was actually really pleased to see that almost 100% of people said yes to whether rising damp existed. But questions. So starting right from the top, I've got a question from Trevor Woodruff. He's asking about DPC courses. He mentions that he's read that injected DPCs can take 9 months to dry. Is this true?
I have no idea. I'm not a chemist. Is the honest answer. My understanding is that most chemical DPCs will cure in much less time than that. I don't know precisely what the cure times for the thixotropic creams are. But you take the point of view, if you're injecting a lot of water into a thick wall, that water, the carrying agent, if you're talking about a water-based chemical damp proofing system, the water takes a while to evaporate out. Absolutely, of course it will. But as far as the times are concerned and how that happens, you're far better off talking to the guys that are formulating and managing this stuff than you are to me. I'm not going to speak authoritatively on cure times and evaporation times for chemical and other damp proof courses.
All right.
But what I will say is that there is no argument that they do work if they're done properly and they're done considerately. The chemistry and the physics of these things are more than established, and chemical damp proof courses installed correctly can prevent the transfer of moisture from the ground. That's just a fact.
All righty. Well, I'm moving on to one. It's a wee bit of a controversy over one of your points, but I know it's down a road which you've been doing a lot of work on quite recently. It's principally looking at historic buildings. It's about building materials simply absorbing moisture, bricks, sandstone, lime, etc. This comes from Michael Hoff. He points out that most historic building stock is built with materials that absorb water. His view, it's the reason why they need to be kept breathable. Now, I know, again, you've been doing a lot of work here with the methodology and stuff like that, Steve. Why don't you give me some insights?
But this is, and I have to say that these are the sorts of conversations I absolutely welcome, because the breathability of a solid structure is something that is massively overstated by people that consider that old buildings are vapor permeable things. They may well be more vapor permeable than a sheet of plastic, but just because it came out of the ground doesn't mean that it's vapor permeable. A piece of granite or a piece of millstone grit or many other forms of stonework are not vapor permeable. In fact, they are less vapor permeable than a brick. A fired brick has lots of cracks and holes and fissures in it, and can be much more permeable than solid materials. The other issue is that you've got, when you start to build a wall, you may have something like a limestone block with a lime finish, but that's got something on the outside and it's got something on the inside, then it's got a paint coat, then it's got a finish. And by the time you build those layers up, the amount of vapor transfer you get from the inside occupied space into and through the wall is infinitesimally small. And even if it did happen, even if you did have proof that you're getting this vapor drive in large volumes, then what would happen? Those walls would wet down because interstitial condensation would occur when you hit the dew point inside the fabric of the wall. And we know that doesn't happen. So this whole idea of mass vapor transfer from inside the building through the structure to the outside is a misnomer. And the issue of water that rises up a wall and then diffuses through without causing damage, again, is a misnomer. That's a rising damp problem. That causes failures in the plaster coats. That causes deposition of salts in the structure. The materials may have more resistance to that process, but it doesn't mean the process isn't taking place. And so buildings and solid building fabrics do not breathe effectively. They not to any significant degree. And look at the maths, look at the science around that. You can't blow air through a solid wall, particularly not once you put a paint coat and a lime and a plaster coat, even if it's lime or whatever. The skim coat, the top coat on even a soft lime render is not totally vapor permeable. You can't blow through it. So I'm sorry I've stood on my soapbox, but when you're getting into an old building of that nature, the chances are you're using more vapor up the chimney, round the window frames and all of that kind of stuff than you are ever going to get going through the wall and calling that a breathable material. It has a buffering effect, yes, but it's certainly not vapor permeable to a degree that's going to release or reduce the amount of air or vapor pressure or moisture in the building or in the wall to any great degree.
It sounds like, certainly putting it into my layman's terms, and as most of you will know know me, I'm not a takey in this sort of area, but it basically sounds like buildings do not breathe. That is a pile of cack. They get wet and they dry out. Is that fair to say?
Buildings get wet and they dry out, and we need to understand how buildings get wet and how they dry out and be sympathetic to that process. I have absolutely no issue with the whole kind of conversation and the in-depth kind of science that sits around permeability, about density, about porosity, and all of that kind of stuff. But you try and clunk that all together and say old buildings breathe and new ones don't. I really struggle with that. It doesn't make sense. There was another term. What was it? It wasn't breathability. It was vapor open and vapor closed. And I sat in a lecture and listened to somebody tell me that all natural materials were vapor open and all modern materials were vapor closed. That to me is a conversation that's been utterly hijacked and is damaging not only to the heritage industry, but it's also misleading to both consumers, and it's wrong for surveyors and building professionals to take that view. Learn more about it. Don't just swallow that pill and just say that, well, somebody clever once said it. Think about it yourselves. Sorry.
And guys, just to let you know, there is a damp methodology out there for historic buildings that is in partnership with a whole host of people, Historic England, RICS, Historic Scotland, etc., and a whole host of other partners that have all kind of signed up to it. I would encourage you just to simply Google it and you will be able to read it for yourself. Guys, also just to let you know, we're just running a couple of minutes over. Steve, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to throw these questions at you. If you can be as quick as possible with them, that would be great. Next question. I actually think this is a question that came up in your last webinar. I'm a wee bit unsure here, but you might be able to tell me. But I've got a Mark Chase asking, what is your view on using siphon tubes at various levels to allow drying out of the structure, which is painted and often rendered and painted externally?
Are you just trying to get me kind of sued?
I don't know. I didn't that question got answered last time.
Why would you do that?
Right. Okay. Well, we'll move on.
If you've got a problem with the external coatings and they're preventing drying, take the external coatings off. Don't drill large diameter holes and then stick siphon tubes in those holes. That to me sounds like utter vandalism and totally pointless. The basic principle of what we've been describing is eliminate the source of moisture from eliminate water before it enters the fabric, not vandalize the building in such a way that you permanently scar it and damage it, to remove it away from its moisture source. That sounds totally backward to me. Besides which, they don't work very long and they don't work very well. So no, don't do that.
No worries. Well, guys, here I'm just going to again, because it's just after 10 o'clock, I'm going to call it quits on the questions, but I will let Steve pass these questions over to Stephen. If he has time to answer just the rest of them, then I'm sure he'll try, but no promises, but I'm sure he will try and endeavour to answer them and get back to you. Just for those that are looking for a bit of some additional information, I can see you smirk. That's just because I know Steve is really busy at the moment. But here, guys, let's looking at if you're looking for additional information Of course, you can go to our technical document library. The link is up there. It's just www.property-care.org/damp control library. But we also you can visit our professional training sessions. We do, and I'm really chuffed to say that our training courses are now back up and running, and our courses for surveyors and technicians within damp and timber are up and running. If you are interested, and this webinar is giving you some food for thought, then please do get in touch with our training team just on 01480 400 000, or email the wonderful Jade just at jade@property-care.org, and you'll be able to find out more information. What's coming up next? Well, I can't actually tell you what's coming up next. We should know by later on today. We're just going to be a bit back and forth on what presentation we're looking to present. It's either going to be a waterproofing one or a ground gas one, but we'll certainly be on the replay email tomorrow, which also, of course, have the replay of today's webinar, which you can share out. Last but not least, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that's been joining us again over the course of the last 3.5 months of which we've been doing these weekly webinars. We feel like we've got a lot out of it. Hopefully, everyone that's been tuning in, you guys feel like you've got a lot out of it. We've certainly seen the benefits. I know Steve, James, the rest of the team, etc. We've been working really hard behind the scenes. Just a big, big thank you. We hope you still tune in to our monthly webinars. Remember that next webinar will be on the 23rd of July. All it really leaves me now to say is just a goodbye from Steve, a goodbye from myself, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you on the 23rd. Bye, everyone.